I think I'm getting myself set up for much more payments to not do that. Okay. It was a very cold and rainy day. I remember laying on my sofa in my parents' family room and just wondering what on earth I was going to do today. See, I grew up in a fairly religious family, and in that family meant they didn't believe in television. They didn't want those worldly influences to infiltrate my young mind. So as I'm daydreaming a little bit, I'm thinking, what can I do? I'm looking around, yeah, there's some books here and some books there. My sisters had romance novels. There were textbooks that my father had, and all of a sudden, the silence was broken, and my thoughts completely changed. There was a knock on the door. So I thought, this is kind of weird. Who could this be? And so I went over to the door, and as I was getting close to the door, my mother came over and she says, "We don't let in strangers." So we looked out the window and we saw this guy that was wanting to sell us something, it appeared. Well, back in those days, there was the full brush man if you needed a new mop head. There were different religious organizations that would go door to door trying to convert you to their religion. But we didn't really recognize this guy except for one thing. He had a little badge on that said Encyclopedia Britannica. My mother, of course, knew that there were two encyclopedia sets during those times. One was the World Book and one was the Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, thinking that it would be okay to let him in, we opened the door, she opened the door, he came in and introduced himself as someone that wanted to further my education. And so as my mother stood there talking through what he had to offer, eventually I started to get excited about the fact that I would have something interesting to read. Here's a set of encyclopedias from A to Z, about 31 volumes in total, that I would be able to look at, just breeze through, and just get some information. Something to do, instead of sit around and daydream and wonder what to do. So anyway, she committed to buying it, and the salesman left a full set of Encyclopedia Britannicas in her house. So I picked up the first volume, A. I began to skim through and read a few things. And then I got to this section called Atomic Energy. And I began to read about that, and of course there were all kinds of cross-references, and it referred me to the Manhattan Project. That was the project that brought us the atomic bomb, and there were a number of scientists that had biographical references in there as well. And so I'm reading about each one of these scientists, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really, really interesting. I wonder what it would be like to have the level of knowledge to be able to go into a field like this. And so I thought, I think what I'll do is I'll go to the library. So I went to the library a few days later, and I got this book called The Legacy of Hiroshima. And it was by Edward Teller, who was one of the nuclear scientists that worked with Fermi and Einstein during the time of the Manhattan Project. And they were doing all this research, and this is a book about how it all happened. Well, chapter by chapter by chapter, it went through in chronological order all the things that had to happen in order to get us to the point of the first blast-off of the atomic bomb. And I remember being specifically intrigued by the fact that Einstein, when they were standing in the desert in Nevada, completely shielded in lead, Enrico Fermi turns to him and says, "So, what if this sets off a nuclear chain reaction that destroys the whole world and the whole universe?" And he said, he turned back to him and he said, "I can't think of a way that would ever be logical." And so he gave the signal to set off the atomic bomb, and it went off. And they couldn't believe how powerful it was. They were knocked over, they were knocked back into the sand. And even though they had special glasses on and everything, they got a lot of radiation dose. I was very intrigued by this, but I remember thinking, I really don't want to go into an area of making weapons, especially ones that are that powerful that can destroy millions and millions of people. So I kept reading in the book, and the very last chapter was this chapter entitled Swords to Plowshares. And it talked about the potential for using and harnessing nuclear power in a peaceful manner to make and generate electricity so that the whole world would have electricity from the peaceful use of nuclear energy rather than complete destruction as a result of wars and atomic wars. So I began to focus on that little chapter, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to go talk to my high school counselor. So I went to my high school counselor. His name was Mr. Carmichael. And I said, I have a dilemma here. I'm about 16 at the time. And I said, I've been doing all this reading about nuclear energy, and I would like to go into this field. And he said, well, okay. I said, well, how do I get there? And he said, well, you're kind of good in math and science so far. I would say you should take the advanced math and science classes so that in the end you can go into engineering. And I said, well, what is engineering? Mr. Carmichael says, well, that's where you learn about the physical and natural laws so that you have a foundation for learning about nuclear physics. And so I said, okay, sounds good. So I continued to take and excel in all the math and science classes, and then I did go into engineering at Purdue University out in Indiana, and then I specialized in nuclear engineering. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to devote my entire life to the safe use of nuclear energy in providing a benefit that the whole world can have. And that's why I chose the career that I'm currently in, and this is why I work at Millstone and have done so all these years. Thank you, Mr. Carmichael. Thank you.